Hi, I'm Kim Johnson, and this is Welcome to the Forest Service, your destination for breaking news and feature stories about in-processing. We're following the journeys of employees as they navigate the Forest Service's in-processing. In this episode, Erin has a discussion about the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement System with her benefits counselor, Greg. Let's join Erin and Greg.
So, you'd like more details about retirement at the Forest Service?
Yeah, Greg, I learned that my new position is covered under the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement coverage. I realized that there are a lot of aspects to this special retirement coverage and want to be sure that I make the right choices in order to make sure I maximize this option for my retirement. Can you explain the requirements and benefits of the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement coverage?
First, I need to be sure you understand the basics of the regular retirement systems available to Forest Service employees. As an employee, you are already covered under either the Federal Employees Retirement System, or FERS, the Civil Service Retirement System, or CSRS, or a variation called the CSRS offset. Do you understand which regular retirement system applies to you? If you do not, please contact a benefits counselor to determine your specific individual retirement coverage by calling the Human Resources Management Contact Center, or HRM, at 1-877-372-7248. And then we should talk again.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I was able to determine that I am covered under the FERS Special Retirement System. I also viewed the video developed for new employees that explains the regular retirement system so I can better understand the basic retirement system. It was a great overview and helped me understand my regular FERS retirement system. Now, I'm very curious about how the Firefighter Law Enforcement FERS Special Retirement coverage is different from the regular FERS retirement coverage. I hope you can help me.
Erin, I'm so glad you were able to determine which retirement system applies to you. Now that you understand the basics of the regular FERS retirement system, I'll explain how the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement coverage is different under FERS. The Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement coverage is designed to allow you to retire early with an enhanced retirement annuity formula. This special retirement coverage is different from regular FERS in three important ways. First, it affects when you are eligible to retire, including mandatory retirement requirements. Second, it requires very specific position coverage requirements. If your career does not follow these specific coverage requirements, you will not be eligible for the enhanced retirement annuity. And third, it provides a more generous retirement annuity. Let's talk about retirement eligibility first. To be eligible to retire, you must work in a firefighter or law enforcement approved position continuously for at least 20 years and be 50. Alternatively, under FERS Special, you may also retire at any age with 25 years of continuously covered service under the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement System. I'm sure you also remember you are subject to mandatory retirement at age 57 under the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement coverage. In order to reach the minimum of 20 years of firefighter or law enforcement service under FERS, there are some specific definitions and requirements which you must be sure to understand and adhere to as well.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've heard there are different types of firefighter and law enforcement coverage that affects individuals. How does that work?
I'm glad you asked. That is the second major difference for the special retirement. The special retirement coverage has a very specific position description coverage requirements. If your career does not follow these specific coverage requirements, you will not be eligible for the enhanced retirement annuity. First, it is important to know that these types of position descriptions in the Forest Service are designated as covered under firefighter or law enforcement coverage regardless of the individual assigned to that position. Whether you, as an individual, are covered under the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement System is based entirely on your personal service history. Let's look at the position description designations first. There are two types of firefighter or law enforcement coverage assigned to position descriptions in the Forest Service. One type is called primary or rigorous. These two terms are used interchangeably. However, officially, primary applies to CSRS positions and rigorous applies to FERS positions. The rigorous designation of a position description is based on several factors. Generally, it means that firefighting or law enforcement is the basic reason for the existence of the position. The firefighting or law enforcement duties are performed a substantial portion of the time, and these duties occur on a regular and recurring basis. The other type of firefighter or law enforcement position description designation is called secondary and applies both to FERS and CSRS positions. Secondary position designation of a position description is generally based on a determination that the position is in the firefighting or law enforcement field of an agency with fire and law enforcement missions. Secondary positions may additionally be classified as supervisory or administrative. Supervisory secondary positions generally have first-line supervisory duties of employees in rigorous or primary positions. Administrative secondary positions generally have managerial, technical, or professional duties which require previous experience in rigorous or primary firefighter or law enforcement duties as a mandatory prerequisite. It is important that you understand that the duties of the position description determine whether it has been designated as a covered firefighter or law enforcement position. Whether a person has coverage under firefighter law enforcement special retirement is dependent upon that individual's personal service history. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I think I understand. I believe a simple way for me to remember the difference between rigorous and secondary designation of firefighter and law enforcement positions is to understand that firefighter or law enforcement positions in the field must be approved as a designated primary or rigorous, while supervisory and administrative positions are usually designated as secondary due to management or supervision duties. So based on what you just shared with me, I now understand that it is possible for me to be assigned to a firefighter or law enforcement position description, but based on my service history, I may not be eligible for the firefighter law enforcement special retirement coverage. You've mentioned this, but I'm not sure how those requirements work. Can you explain that to me?
You bet. It appears you understand the basic concepts of the rigorous and secondary coverage designations of position descriptions. Now that you understand that the duties in the position description dictate whether a position description is approved for firefighter or law enforcement special retirement purposes, we will move on how this specifically affects you, the employee. I'll do my best to answer your question as it relates to firefighter law enforcement special retirement system coverage requirements for individuals. Let's address employees assigned to rigorous FERS positions first. Firefighter or law enforcement special retirement coverage applies to all employees that are placed into a firefighter or law enforcement rigorous position. If you are in a rigorous position, the maximum entry age or MEA requirement was applied to ensure that you met basic qualifications. MEA requires an individual to be under the age of 37 at the time of appointment to a rigorous FERS firefighter or law enforcement position. There are some exceptions to the maximum entry age, so if you believe that you may qualify for an exception waiver, you will want to contact the Human Resources Management Contact Center, or HRM, at 1-877-372-7248. If you decide to leave a rigorous covered position for a non-covered position before you have attained 20 years of covered service, you will no longer be covered under the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system. You may return to the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system in the future by being assigned to a rigorous covered position. However, you will be required to meet the maximum entry age requirement again. A revised calculation for MEA at this point will allow you to receive a reduction in your current age equivalent to any previous service covered under firefighter law enforcement special retirement for which is credible for retirement purposes under FERS. If you have any questions on maximum entry age, please contact your benefits counselor for clarification.
Okay. I understand MEA and how that applies to the firefighter law enforcement special retirement. Is there more that I need to know about remaining covered under the special retirement?
Yes. An individual may remain in a rigorous covered position for their entire career, and then upon meeting age and service requirement, they may retire under the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system. Most individuals, however, move into a secondary firefighter or law enforcement covered position at some point in their career. In order to retain coverage in the secondary position under the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system, there are additional requirements that must be met. The individual must have held a rigorous covered position for a minimum of 3 years. You must also pay retirement deductions into the FERS retirement system while assigned to a rigorous covered position, and transfer directly from a rigorous covered position without a break in service exceeding 3 days to a secondary firefighter or law enforcement covered position to remain in the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system. The 3 years do not have to be creditable for retirement purposes under FERS, as they do for MEA. However, you must pay into FERS as a permanent employee in a rigorous position before transferring directly to a secondary firefighter or law enforcement position if you wish to retain coverage in the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system in a secondary position. For example, if you have performed rigorous firefighter duties as a temporary employee for at least 2 years, and now as a permanent employee for 1 year, you would be eligible to move directly to a secondary firefighter or law enforcement position. This would allow you to retain coverage in the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system. However, if you had performed rigorous firefighter duties as a temporary employee for at least 3 years and had an opportunity to be assigned to a secondary firefighter or law enforcement position as your first permanent position under FERS where you would be paying retirement deductions, you would not be able to retain coverage under the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system in that secondary covered firefighter or law enforcement position. As another example, some individuals may not have a direct transfer from a rigorous or primary covered position to a secondary covered position, or may not have paid into FERS while in a permanent rigorous covered position, or may have a break in firefighter or law enforcement covered positions and cannot meet MEA to return to a rigorous position to regain the firefighter law enforcement special retirement. Any one of those reasons will mean that this person will not be covered under the firefighter or law enforcement special retirement, even though they are assigned to a secondary firefighter or law enforcement position.
These rules for transferring between rigorous and secondary covered firefighter or law enforcement positions seem very important to retaining my firefighter law enforcement special retirement.
Yes, these are the key elements to being covered under the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system under FERS. If you remain in a permanent, rigorous position for your entire career, it is not a factor. However, most individuals move to a secondary position at some point. If the employee doesn't comply with all of the specific service requirements, the employee will lose eligibility for firefighter law enforcement special retirement. If you have the opportunity to move to a secondary firefighter or law enforcement position in the future, you should ask for someone in human resources to verify if you have 3 years in a rigorous position before you accept the position. Additionally, please be aware that it is possible for an employee to be qualified for a secondary firefighter or law enforcement position and not be covered under the firefighter law enforcement special retirement. These individuals meet the secondary firefighter or law enforcement position qualification requirements of previous experience and are therefore qualified for the position. However, they are not eligible for the firefighter law enforcement special retirement because they do not meet all of the other requirements necessary. Once in the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system, you can remain in the special retirement system as long as you continue in rigorous or secondary covered positions without a break in covered firefighter or law enforcement service until you reach mandatory retirement age 57 or elect to voluntarily retire. I know that there's a lot of information to be understood when it applies to the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system. I would encourage you to contact your Human Resources Management Contact Center, or HRM, at 1-877-372-6985 7248 any time that you are changing positions that may affect your retirement eligibility. Specifically, if you are leaving a firefighter or law enforcement covered position, or if you are moving from a rigorous or primary covered position to a secondary covered position. It is better to understand the consequences of your career choices on your eligibility under the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system before you make any final decisions.
I think I understand what the eligibility requirements for me in the firefighter law enforcement special retirement system are now. However, I'm not sure why the special retirement system is beneficial to me. Can you explain that to me?
Of course. In general, under the standard formulas for regular FERS retirement annuity, you must meet the minimum retirement age, MRA, at age 55 to 57, and the regular FERS annuity is calculated at 1% multiplied by your average high 3 salary for every creditable year that you work. The 1% increases to 1.1% if you remain employed until age 62 and attain at least 20 years of creditable service. There is no mandatory retirement age under regular FERS. However, if you are covered under the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement System, you are eligible to retire before you reach the MRA. You can retire at age 50 if you have 20 years of firefighter or law enforcement covered creditable service, or at any age if you have 25 years of firefighter or law enforcement covered creditable service. If you are covered under the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement System at age 57, you will, however, be subject to mandatory retirement. Additionally, your FERS retirement annuity will be calculated under an enhanced formula if you retire under the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement. Your enhanced FERS annuity will be calculated at 1.7% of your average high 3 salary for 20 years of creditable firefighter or law enforcement coverage. All remaining years of creditable service in excess of 20 years will be calculated at 1% of your average high 3 salary per year. Therefore, for 20 years of service under a regular FERS retirement, the annuity calculation is usually 20% of the high 3 average salary. Under the special retirement with 20 years of service, the calculation is 34% of the high 3 average salary. There are also some benefits pertaining to the FERS Special Retirement Supplement if you retire before you reach your minimum retirement age, MRA, and some available early withdrawal options for your thrift savings plan. I would encourage you to contact your benefits counselor when you get closer to retirement for updated and current information on these benefits, as well as a FERS annuity estimate.
I appreciate you explaining the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement System to me. I understand it much better now.
In review, the special retirement coverage is different from the regular retirement in 3 very important ways. First, it affects when you are eligible to retire, including mandatory retirement requirements. Second, it requires very specific position coverage requirements. If your career does not follow these specific coverage requirements, you will not be eligible for the enhanced retirement annuity. And third, it provides a more generous retirement annuity. I'm very glad that I could help you.
That is a lot of information for the Firefighter Law Enforcement Special Retirement System for FERS employees. It's wonderful that Greg could share information on special retirement for firefighter and law enforcement. Thanks for watching. That's it from Welcome to the Forest Service.